We learn lots of things on this show, especially things you don't need to know. Yesterday at Prime Minister's Questions, Jeremy Corbyn staged a good old-fashioned ambush, claiming to have evidence that the government had cut a deal with Surrey Council to avoid the prospect of a local tax increase. Surrey County Council, which is, of course, Conservative-controlled, had announced it would hold a referendum on raising council tax by 15% to pay for the spiralling cost of social care. To raise it by that amount, you need to have a referendum. But at PMQs, the Labour leader said a text message exchange showed the council had dropped its plan after striking what he called a sweetheart deal with the government. Joko has the details.
Yes, the text messages in question were sent by Conservative leader of Surrey County Council, David Hodge. It's thought they were intended for Nick King, a special advisor at the Department for Communities and Local Government. But instead, he sent them to another Nick, believed to be Nick Forbes, the Labour leader of Newcastle Council, who leaked them. In his first message, Councillor Hodge said he had been advised that the Communities Department was working on a solution. A further message says he just received clarification that the numbers being talked about are acceptable enough for him to call off the R, which we assume referred to the referendum on the tax rise. After the messages were published, Surrey's leader said there had been no deal with the government. But later, the Communities Department clarified that Surrey would be part of a new pilot scheme to retain 100% of the money it raises from business rates, which could in future plug the gaps in funding. It added all other councils will be free to apply to participate in these pilots, and the government invites them to do so. Andrew.
Thank you very much. To discuss that, we're joined by one of Surrey's Conservative MPs, there's quite a few of them, Kwasi Kwarteng, and Labour's only Surrey councillor, Robert Evans. Now, we did ask the government for an interview, but we were told that nobody was available. They're probably too busy texting each other. Anyway, welcome to both of you. Now, Councillor Evans, you were at the Surrey Council budget meeting earlier this week. Tell us what happened.
We all got there for the budget meeting, which we were expecting to start at 10 o'clock. First of all, we were told there was an adjournment till 11 o'clock, then another adjournment on the budget until 1 o'clock, when we were all still anticipating, and even the Conservatives and the Cabinet members in the Conservatives were expecting that there was going to be a vote on this 15% rise in council tax and putting it out to a referendum. And then we were told by the leader, Mr Hodge, that we wouldn't need that, and that he'd had a promise, or he was now confident that he could go ahead with 5%. But this was a shock to everyone. So
when you went into that meeting, the almost universal expectation was that you would be voting for essentially for a 15% rise on which could only happen with a referendum.
Absolutely.
The fact it was cut back to I think 4.9%, which falls under the you don't need a referendum, was in the end a total surprise.
It was a total surprise to everyone, even, as I say, the Conservative Cabinet members who didn't know that this was going to happen.
In your view, was a deal done?
Well, something must have been done, because for months Mr Hodge, the leader of the council, has been telling us there is no alternative. He's spoken to government about the funding needing in Surrey, and that the funding for adult social care has been cut, and that the budget wasn't going to add up without a 15% rise in council tax. And I think they got wind that they were going to lose the referendum.
Well, right, which is probably they would have done, would they?
Well, certainly there was no evidence that people were going to vote for it. I think most people thought they'd lose it by about 75%.
Did he indicate he'd had any assurances from anybody that he could with only 5%, if I can round it up, with a 5% CT rise, that he could fill the gap?
No, he didn't give that assurance at all. And we've been asking for information and details, and it's all been clouded in mystery and secrecy. It's all sort of cloak and dagger stuff, and he's kept the council in the dark on this.
So what happened?
I've no idea what happened.
You don't? You're a Tory MP
I do know, but I don't actually run Surrey County Council, nor do I have a seat on Surrey County Council. What I do know was that a lot of local activists, the party in Surrey was very upset about the prospect of a referendum. There was huge pressure applied to David Hodge from not only my constituency in Spelthorne, but our chairman, our volunteers across the county. And we didn't want to have a referendum. We didn't go into politics as Conservatives. to raise taxes by 15%, and we didn't want to do that.
But there are 10 Conservative MPs in Surrey.
I think there are 11.
All right, then 11. I mean, you could say 12, and I wouldn't be surprised. 5 of them are in government, including the Chancellor, the Health Secretary. You're one of the MPs. This was of huge interest to the Conservative Party in Surrey. There must have been some involvement by MPs of the prospect of a Conservative council proposing a referendum on a 15%
Yeah, there was involvement.
tax
We were very upset
rise.
about the notion.
So why is it not happening?
We tried to use persuasion. Well, the referendum isn't happening. We managed to
neither is the 15% rise.
We managed to exert enough moral pressure, if you like, persuasion, to call off the referendum. And I think ultimately it was a decision that Surrey County Council and particularly David Hodge made.
The deal that they say has been done is that you'll be part of a pilot that gets to keep the business tax to see what happens. That doesn't come in until 2018, my understanding, that you've missed the first round of this pilot.
2018 is only a year away.
So how are you going to fill the gap?
And in fact, well, you mentioned the 4.9% rise, but the other thing that you've also failed to mention in your piece was that the...
Well, I didn't fail to mention that because you just said I did mention it.
Well, you cut me off. You didn't let me finish what I was going to say. The proposed business rate increase was actually in the manifesto. That's something that's very clear. I think Surrey are very keen that they retain business rates because that obviously is there's a lot of business in Surrey. I think it's a huge generator of income. And I think that will help, that will go some way to helping the shortfall in revenue.
Well, do we know how much? In 2015-16, Surrey kept 41 million of the local business rate revenue. The social care bill is 560 million. How will you fill the gap?
Well, I think there are other proposals. As you've said, with the 5% increase. And I mean, you will know this because David Hodge has made this very clear. There may well have to be some reductions in expenditure. I mean, that's how you balance a budget typically.
Can holding on to a bigger chunk of the business rate make much of a difference?
Well, there is business in Surrey, of course, and there is business.
Prosperous business.
Prosperous business, but it's not a solution for this year. There is a big gap for this year, starting at the beginning of April. And when I asked for information, this was what I got back from the leader of the council.
There's a lot of black lines.
Yeah, this is.
Let me just say that.
This is a letter which was sent to Kwasi Kwarteng and all the MPs, and I was asking for details of what's going on, and it's been redacted. So.
Why was it? Are there national secrets in this?
Well, I don't know.
It's only from the leader of the council.
It's the leader of the council to all Surrey Conservative MPs.
Is there a D-notice on this? Is it the Secrets Act?
What could he be saying to Surrey MPs that he won't say to the council?
I don't know. I mean, from my recollection...
you got a copy of the letter.
I know, I read the letter. From my recollection, there were
Tell me about the government's commitment to transparency.
There were no state secrets. Well, this is David Hodge. I mean, I'm not here to answer for him.
Were you not curious to know what was in it?
Well, I read it. But from my recollection, there was nothing too sensational or things that.
But isn't it unusual
secrecy.
to redact things when councillors are asking what's going on? There's no openness. How are we supposed as councillors to vote on a budget at a difficult time if we're not being given all the information or told what's going on?
But my understanding, there was a full debate, and a lot of the numbers were pretty transparent in terms of the picture of the budget.
The debate had been built up for 15%, which many people didn't like, and you've said you didn't like it. But the council was proposing that was what the budget figures, and then at the last minute, on the basis of some what we now know were texts that were being sent by the leader of the council, we were told it was going to be all right and that we could get away with just 5%. It's no way to run a council. It's a shambles.
According to the council finance director, Surrey will now have to find an additional £30 million of cuts in this financial year.
Well, you said that the care budget was 560 million, so 30 million is a large amount, but in the overall context of the budget, they are going to have to find these savings.
But it's already lost 170 million in central government funding.
But Andrew, you will appreciate that over the last 4 or 5 years there has been a squeeze on the national budget. Now, this has affected councils up and down the country. Every council in the country has to face a degree of financial pressure. And Surrey, I think, are doing this as well as anyone.
Now, we know that there's been squeeze on budgets and the government has felt it had to reduce the deficit and so on. We know all that. But it was a political decision to do that by taking 4.6 billion out of the social care system. That was a political decision by your government at a time of rising of demographics among retired people, with social care was more needed. You took that political decision, and that is surely why even prosperous places like Surrey are in deep trouble?
Well, you're right. I mean, the decision was, the country has demographic challenges, as you've described. And the question was whether that commitment should be met at a national level, from the national exchequer, or whether local government, local borough and really county councils should take some of the strain. And that was the political decision. I think this is in line with our policy of trying to devolve responsibility in terms of budget, and localism, devolved power, means taking more responsibility.
But no, you devolved the problem. That was how you cut the budget by 4.6 billion and said, over to you. That's what you did with it. And you chose some of the most vulnerable people to be affected by this. There wasn't an argument that at some stage the budget deficit had to be brought down and all the rest of it, but you chose to do it in a way that hit some of the oldest and most vulnerable people in society.
I disagree with that. What we were trying to do was to say that the responsibility for this adult social care should be devolved down to the county council. Now, if the government had spent the money, there wasn't going to be any more money. The government would have had to make those reductions, but I think it was perfectly reasonable to say that local councils were best placed to decide how to spend this reduced amount of money.
What is the situation now? Let's assume that we know the council tax is now going to go up by 5%, not 15%. We know that there's going to be something done on business rates coming in I think 18 months' time or so. What is the situation between now and then, as far as you can tell?
Well, there's a gap. There's a big gap in the budget because unless there's some sort of secret deal being done between Surrey and the government to fill that gap, there's going to be a big hole in Surrey's finances, because one minute we were told it had to be 15% and all of a sudden it's 5%. And it's no good saying that adult social care should be funded by local councils. I think everybody recognises that this is a central government responsibility. Adult social care funding will increase as people get older. We know that. There are more and more people, perhaps particularly in Surrey, and it's got to be a national government responsibility.
It strikes me, Giles, there are two things I'd like you to comment on this. One is the natural journalistic suspicion thinks, here's a Tory heartland, Tory council, only one Labour MP on the council.
And even he looks like a Tory, doesn't he?
I mean, he didn't come on.
Is that a compliment?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry that our guest of the day is so rude to our guest.
That was intended as a compliment.
Let me finish that question. And of course, it's dealing with the Tory government, which the Chancellor and the Health Secretary come from this county area, distinguished backbenchers like our other guest here today. That's one thing. But the second thing is that even if keeping more business rates was a solution for Surrey, that's because Surrey's got lots of businesses. There are other parts of the country where they don't have that many businesses, and this is not a route that helps their social care.
There's a double tension here, because going back 25 years when I was an MP, I recall exactly the same conflict between local government and national government. There's nothing new in this. Essentially, the people at County Hall think they can do things better than the national government does, and the national government knows it can do things better than at county level. And so there is always this tension. It goes back literally decades. The new dilemma, of course, is that we also now believe in localism. Yeah. So that we're giving more authority, more power and more money to people we don't always really believe can do the job as properly.
And problems as well, of course.
And problems. So now there is a big national problem about this. Let's devolve it and see what happens.
OK, we've run out of time. So